My name is Madison Blake. That evening, I stood silently in front of the most upscale restaurant in Seattle, where my mother-in-law, Judith Donovan, had made a family dinner reservation that I was never invited to. The host looked at me with sympathy, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name's not on the list." And there she was, seated inside, raising a glass of red wine with a triumphant smile. My husband, Eric, turned his head away, pretending not to see me. Every eye in the room landed on me, waiting for me to walk away in silence. But I simply said, "Would you please ask the owner to come out?" And the entire room went silent. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own marriage? Humiliated right in front of the person who was supposed to protect you? Leave a comment if you've ever felt the same. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because I'm about to tell you the rest of that night. The night I reclaimed more than just a seat at the table. I reclaimed my life. I hadn't even said another word when the restaurant's inner door opened slightly. A man walked out with a calm presence, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, salt and pepper hair neatly slicked back. His face was composed, sharp, but when he looked at me, his eyes were filled with warmth. He stopped right in front of the host, glanced at him, then turned to me and asked in a low, familiar voice, "Is everything all right, Blake?" The room seemed to freeze. A few guests began turning to look. Judith sat nearly paralyzed, her eyes wide, lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. I smiled and walked slowly toward Daniel, the owner of the Donovan Rose Fine Dining Group, and the man who once called me the most promising student he had ever mentored when I worked behind the kitchen line years ago. I nodded in greeting, keeping my voice steady. "Sorry to bother you. I came because I was invited to a family dinner, but I think there might have been some kind of mistake." Daniel glanced toward the table in the corner where Judith sat like a dethroned queen. She stood awkwardly, trying to recover her usual air of superiority. "Daniel," she said, attempting a dismissive laugh, "I think there's just been some confusion. We made a reservation for 6 and she wasn't one of them." Daniel didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on me. He tilted his head slightly toward the host. "She's the one who acquired full ownership of this restaurant group 3 months ago. This is one of the first locations she chose for renovation. I think we can find her a table right away." The silence was deafening. I didn't turn to look at Judith, but I heard the sharp scrape of her chair against the marble floor, the soft clink of her wine glass hitting the plate, and the whisper from one of her nieces at the table. "She's the one behind Blake Hospitality?" Daniel turned to me with professional grace. "Would you prefer a private table, or would you like to join your in-laws?" I smiled gently, glancing toward the dinner table. My eyes met Eric's bewildered stare before landing on Judith, still standing tall but now visibly pale. "I'll dine at that table," I said, as if I were simply choosing a wine pairing. "After all, it is a family dinner, isn't it?" Daniel smiled, then signaled the staff. Within moments, another chair was added. I walked over slowly, confident, unshaken. As I pulled out the chair beside Eric, Judith still hadn't found her voice. I looked at her, not to provoke but to show her clearly. I wasn't backing down, I wasn't fragile, and I wasn't lowering my gaze anymore. "I was surprised when Daniel called me by name," I said lightly. "I didn't think he'd still remember me after all these years." "How could I forget?" Daniel replied smoothly from behind. "You're the one who convinced our first investor to back the Blake Hospitality project. You're not just an old student, Madison. You're an integral part of this entire restaurant network." Judith gave a faint, brittle laugh, grasping for her balance. "Well, that explains it. I just didn't expect you'd choose hospitality." I lifted my water glass and slowly traced the rim with my finger. "I think people should call it the art of service. Because to survive in this industry, you need discipline, knowledge, and a great deal of resilience." Charlotte, Judith's eldest granddaughter, quietly set her knife down. Emma, the other, rolled her eyes, clearly unsure how to react. And Eric, he sat frozen, silent. The confidence he once carried as a rising businessman had evaporated. In its place was worry etched into every line of his face. I didn't blame Eric for not speaking. Not yet. A small part of me still wanted to believe he was caught between what was right and what he feared his mother might do. Daniel stepped forward, setting a different menu in front of me, one reserved for senior partners. Our chef would like to send a special welcome to the woman behind the hospitality group we're proud to partner with. Tonight's amuse-bouche is on the house. Judith squinted, her voice sharp. So everyone here's flattering you just because you have money? I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I looked straight at her. No, ma'am. They respect me because I built something real. And because I don't use power to exclude people from the table. A long silence followed. Someone at a nearby table whispered, "Did she really just say that?" Judith shifted her wine glass slightly, her eyes flashing with something close to panic, though she tried to suppress it. But I saw it. After all these years of treating me like I was beneath her, like I'd always stay quiet, she was now being forced to watch me speak, clearly, calmly, and right in her territory. I sat upright and picked up my knife, cutting into the appetizer that had just arrived. The aroma drifted gently upward. As I brought the first bite to my mouth, I could almost taste the bitterness in Judith's eyes. It was stronger than any spice the kitchen could have used. I didn't need to say anything more. The story was just getting started. I sliced another piece of the appetizer slowly, deliberately, as if nothing around me was worth hurrying over. But I could still feel the weight of every pair of eyes at that table. They weren't curious anymore. They were uncomfortable. And in that moment I saw who was the quietest, the one who should have spoken the loudest: Eric. He sat to my right, his hand hovering just above the table, index finger tapping gently against the side of his water glass like he was trying to regulate his breathing. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at his mother. He stared at a cold piece of bread on his plate like it might offer him a way out of the room. Judith broke the silence first. Her voice soft, almost nostalgic, like she was telling a fond memory to a stranger. "I remember clearly," she said, spearing a piece of salad, "when Eric brought a young girl to our family Christmas party. Hair tied back, wearing a simple beige dress. No one knew who she was. No one in the Donovan family had ever heard the name Blake." I set my knife down, keeping my hands still on the table. Judith smiled slightly, eyes directed at me with a pointed undertone. She said she worked at a little cafe in Fremont. I remember because I had the housekeeper bring her a spare coat, the only one in the entire cloakroom that fit her petite frame. Charlotte chuckled under her breath but quickly covered her mouth when Emma gave her a sharp look. I tilted my head, my tone even. "I still have that coat. It reminds me that when people look down on you because you have nothing, the only thing you truly need is the belief that you can change that." Judith didn't flinch. Some people work hard through education and perseverance. Others choose a different path. They meet the right person, say the right things, know when to appear fragile. That's also a form of intelligence. I looked her straight in the eyes without masking the contempt in my gaze. "You're talking about me clinging to Eric, aren't you?" Eric shifted slightly but still wouldn't look at me. His hand tensed around his napkin. Judith shrugged. "I'm just stating facts. Everyone can see it. You had no family, no background. An orphan raised in shelters. Then suddenly you marry my son and become Madison Donovan." I laughed, not because it was funny but because there was nothing left to pretend about. "So if I was just an orphan, once a waitress, and now sitting here with you at this restaurant, at this table, invited by the owner himself, who's really climbed up, mother? And who's slipping down?" Charlotte froze mid-spoonful of soup. Emma didn't lift her eyes. Judith leaned back slightly, holding her wine glass. "You may have bought shares, hired the best attorneys, pretended to be independent. But the truth is still the same. Without Eric, there would be no Madison Blake today." I straightened my posture. The table fell silent again, not because there was nothing left to say but because no one expected what I was about to say next. "So you believe Eric is the one who brought me here? The one who built Blake Hospitality?" I turned to Eric, my voice soft but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you want to say anything?" Eric closed his eyes for a second, then opened them, but still didn't meet mine. He only whispered, "Madison, now's not the time." I nodded gently like I had just heard an old melody. "That's all right. I'll speak for you." I turned back to Judith. Eric had no capital when he started investing. He had ideas, he had connections, but no cash. The first check that allowed him to buy his first property? That was mine. $15,000. From 6 years of working, studying, and selling my car. Judith faltered but forced a dismissive laugh. "And you know what?" I said, eyes locked on her. No one in the Donovan family ever asked how I got that money. No one asked how many sleepless nights I endured, how many times I collapsed behind the kitchen line, how many fingernails I broke washing dishes during night shifts just to save every penny. I picked up my water and took a slow sip. Judith was still staring at me, but now her gaze was no longer condescending. It had turned cautious. I don't need your pity, I continued. And I certainly don't need your validation. But I won't let you rewrite my story just to fit the narrow frame of your worldview. Eric still didn't look at me. His silence wasn't about fearing his mother anymore. It was about fearing the truth he had tried to bury for years. That it wasn't Judith who believed in him first. It was me. The air around the table had grown noticeably colder. I placed my hand on the edge of the napkin, smoothing out its crease. You may look down on me, Mother, I said slowly, but don't you dare look down on what I sacrificed to sit at this table. And Judith said nothing. She just gripped her wine glass so tightly that her nails left imprints on the crystal. I turned to Eric, waiting. But he still said nothing. And that's when I began to understand. Some people choose to live in the shadow of others their entire lives, even when the light is right in front of them. I left the restaurant just after 9 p.m. Outside, the air in Seattle was crisp, a thin layer of mist trailing over the hoods of parked cars like breath that hadn't settled. I didn't go home. I didn't call Eric. I didn't send a single message. I simply got into my car, typed in the address of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, and leaned back into the seat. Every time I blinked, I saw my husband's empty gaze across the table as he sat silent before his mother. It didn't make me angry anymore. It just made me feel hollow. Like I had finally closed the door to my heart, and didn't even feel it. 16th floor. Room 1610. My personal attorney, Hannah Whitmore, was already there. She sat at the table near the large window, laptop open, the screen casting a cool light across her composed face. When I walked in, she stood up, not to ask if I was sure. We'd had enough meetings to know I wasn't here to hesitate. He didn't react at all? Hannah asked, handing me a thick file. During dinner? I sat down on the sofa, took off my coat. My hands still trembled slightly despite the warmth of the room. Not a word. Not a glance. As if he didn't want to acknowledge I was even there. Hannah wasn't surprised. She pulled a USB from her bag and plugged it into the laptop. You've done more than enough for him. It's time to reclaim what's yours. I turned toward the window. The city lights shimmered below, glittering, impersonal. I used to dream of building a family in this city, that after all those years of struggling alone, I would finally find peace beside the man I loved. But dreams aren't assets you can count on to protect you. Where do we begin? I asked. Hannah opened a presentation on her screen. Each slide appeared with the clarity of a sharpened blade. First, Donovan Capital. According to the transfer agreement from 2016, you were the original capital provider with oversight rights. But Eric never officially transferred shares. All paperwork remains in his name, while you signed indirect operational authorization. We've drafted a demand for return of 51% ownership per the terms. That'll be sent tomorrow. I nodded. I have the original agreement. Still sealed in the safe. Perfect. Hannah continued. Second, real estate, the penthouse in downtown Seattle. You were the original purchaser. Later transferred title to Eric to avoid estate tax issues. But the sales contract didn't include a clause for permanent ownership transfer. Which means, I still retain legal control, I finished for her. Exactly. And last, your private capital reserve, 2 shadow accounts used to fund joint investment projects. You're the sole signatory. If you pull out, Eric will lose liquidity immediately. I looked down at the thick folder in my lap. For years I had stood behind him. Provided capital, secured partnerships, handled crises, doing everything to maintain his image. Meanwhile, he went to galas, shook hands, gave speeches, and slowly convinced himself that it was all his. And I was just the supportive wife. I clenched my hands, then released them. Calmly. Readied. Hannah, I said slowly, everything needs to happen within this week. She nodded. I've already prepared everything. The documents are ready, just waiting for your signature. I picked up the pen and turned each page. Some of the clauses I had read dozens of times had fine-tuned every single word. Back then, I didn't think I'd ever use them to pull out. I simply thought, if anything ever went wrong, I wanted us both to be protected. But now I understood, standing behind someone doesn't always mean you're weak. Sometimes it means you're waiting for the right moment. I paused on page 8, then looked up. What if he fights back? Hannah gave a dry smile. You have legal proof for every investment. The original agreements bear his live signature. If Eric takes this to court, he'll have to admit that you laid the foundation of the company. I signed. The first page. Then the second. The pen glided across the lines like a blade carving into stone. When I finished signing, Hannah neatly stacked the documents and closed her laptop. We'll send the withdrawal notice and initiate the asset annulment proceedings for the marriage. I assume you want to keep this confidential until it's finalized. I looked her straight in the eye. I don't need publicity. I just need fairness. Hannah stood up, walked to the door, and left me alone in the quiet hotel room. I poured myself a glass of water and stood in front of the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked calm, strong, but in her eyes, there was still something left unresolved. A flicker of regret. Not regret for Eric, but for all the years I had spent waiting for him to grow up. I picked up my phone, opened the encrypted folder, and selected an old audio file. Eric's voice came through, recorded 5 years ago during a private meeting with me and his first investor. If it weren't for Madison, I wouldn't have made it anywhere. She believed in me when I had nothing. I saved a copy of the clip, then turned the phone off. Dinner had only been the beginning, and I had finally stepped out from behind the curtain. Eric came home just before 11 p.m. The suburban house was still lit up but eerily quiet. He pushed open the door. The sound of his dress shoes echoed sharply against the hardwood, carrying down the empty hallway. No soft music playing. No candlelight or hint of lavender from the kitchen, the things I used to leave behind when working late. My suitcase was gone from the staircase landing. The painting I'd made that hung in the living room, gone. Even the ceramic vase I brought back from New Mexico, the one Judith always scoffed at as cheap, but which I kept because it held memories, had vanished. He called my name. Once. Then again. No answer. He walked into the bedroom, opened the closet, pulled out the drawer on my side. Just a small slip of paper left on the vanity table. I'm not here anymore. And I won't be back. Eric sank onto the edge of the bed, his fingers crumpling the note. The house felt colder than any winter he'd known. He grabbed his phone, called me. No connection. Tried again. Walked. He called Judith. His mother picked up after 2 rings, her tone calm, like she was sipping chamomile tea. You're home. She's gone, Eric said, his voice uneven. Good, Judith replied without hesitation. You're finally free of her. Do you even realize what's happening? She left nothing but a note. Judith cut him off. You should be grateful. Madison probably realized where she really belongs. Eric wanted to argue, but no reason came. Throughout our marriage, he'd never once stood up for me when his mother insulted me. Now it seemed too late to make anything right. He ended the call and walked into his home office. Everything inside was tidy as always. But when he opened the safe, he froze. The financial documents lay neatly inside. Everything appeared untouched, except for one new envelope marked in handwriting that wasn't his. Read this before calling your lawyer. Eric opened it. Inside were copies of the original investment documents from 7 years ago, the day I handed him the capital to start Donovan Capital. Black ink on white paper, every term spelled out. I was the primary investor with financial oversight, and the right to withdraw all funds without consent if there was evidence of unethical behavior or serious breach of trust. Next to it was a copy of the downtown penthouse ownership agreement. Sole listed owner, Madison Blake. Eric sat back as if the blood had been drained from his body. He flipped through the pages searching for mistakes, but there were none. Every number, every signature was real. He had signed them, agreed to them, forgotten them, drowned in pride. The house phone rang, snapping him out of the spiral. It was Judith. I just found the documents in the safe, he said hoarsely. The entire company is in Madison's hands. Silence. That can't be, Judith whispered. I have copies of the original contracts. I signed them. You told me not to double-check. Don't blame me, she snapped, but her voice lacked its usual steel. You're the Sue. You should have known what you were signing. I never thought she'd use it against me. Someone like her? You didn't expect it. She's the one who brought me here, Eric said quietly, as if confessing something he'd never dared admit before. Then a ding echoed from Judith's email inbox. She opened her computer. A new message appeared on screen, bold subject line. Notice of investment withdrawal and dissolution of partnership, Madison Blake. She clicked in, her eyes scanning the lines. This is to formally notify my unilateral withdrawal of all investment capital from Donovan Holdings, effective within 7 business days from the date of this notice. Below was the digital signature of attorney Hannah Whitmore, and over 20 pages of attached legal documents. Judith shot to her feet, eyes darkening. You have to stop this. How? Eric choked out. She didn't break any rules. Everything's legal. She has every right. Judith's breathing quickened. If she follows through, we lose everything. The company. The name. The reputation. Do you understand? Eric leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. She'd been preparing all along. That sentence kept echoing in his mind like a hollow sound bouncing through what used to be a home. But now, every brick of this place was starting to tremble. And he was the one who had thrown the first stone that brought it down. I sat by the window of my penthouse, soft morning light filtering through pale gray silk curtains. A cup of coffee rested by my hand, hot and strong just the way I liked it. On the table in front of me, my laptop was open, screen filled with emails, press releases, and today's headlines. Anonymous CEO of Blake Hospitality revealed. Madison Blake, the woman behind the Donovan capital empire. Eric Donovan's wife files capital withdrawal, set to transfer full ownership. I stared at those words without fear. There was only one thing that settled in my heart: relief. Relief that after all those years of silence, I had finally spoken in my own voice. A voice no longer muffled by politeness, expectations, or blind love. The phone rang. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. Judith. I didn't answer. Less than 3 minutes later, it rang again. This time Eric. I let it ring. I wanted them to feel exactly what it meant to be ignored, to be sidelined, to be invisible, the same way they had treated me for years. I left my chair and walked into the study, where Hannah was finishing a video call with the legal team. As soon as she ended the call with the PR specialist, she turned to me. Madison, he just had their legal team send a warning letter. They're threatening to sue for intellectual property violation. I sat down, slipped off my watch, and placed it on the desk. Expected. Did they reference any specific clauses? No. Just vague intimidation. But you should know, Judith already contacted a few familiar press outlets. She's trying to shift the narrative, saying you're just a bored housewife who invested by chance. I let out a soft laugh. Same tone as always. Bitter and unimaginative. Hannah smirked faintly. We've prepared a counter-release. And one more thing. Do you want me to use it? I looked at her. Nodded. Hannah typed a few commands, then switched her screen to share mode. A video clip began to play. The image wasn't very sharp, but the audio was crystal clear. It was an internal meeting from 5 years ago. Eric was seated in the center, white shirt, hands resting on a folder, his face still young and nervous. Madison was the only one who believed in me when I had nothing. His voice echoed, uncertain but genuine. She gave me the first funds without asking for anything, just a handwritten agreement. I signed it because I trusted her, and I knew, if this ever succeeded, she should be the first to benefit. The screen blurred, but Eric's expression was unmistakably clear. No coercion. No doubt. Just a young man speaking honestly about the woman who had pulled him out of the deep end. I straightened in my chair. Use the video. Publish a shortened version to the press. Send the full clip to their attorneys. Hannah nodded and got to work. At that moment, my phone rang again. This time it was the Donovan house landline. I answered, not because I wanted to hear it, but because I knew this was an inevitable part of the game. Judith's voice came through. Not cold like usual. It was shaking, uneven. Madison, what are you doing? Are you really going to destroy everything? I'm not destroying anything. I'm reclaiming what's mine. The Donovan name, our legacy. No one has damaged your family's legacy more than you have. I've protected your image more times than you know. Eric is falling apart. Do you want to see him break? I paused for a second, then spoke, slow and clear. Do you know when Eric really started to break? When he stayed silent as you insulted me. When he left the woman who built his company sitting alone outside a locked door. You're getting revenge. No. I'm restoring the truth. I hung up. Not angry. Not trembling. Just calmly ending a call that never should have happened in the first place. Hannah turned to me. We just got confirmation. Media will release the video and full statement tomorrow morning. I nodded and leaned back in the chair. The battle had officially begun. I spent the rest of the morning watering my plants, rearranging my books, and slowly wiping the dust off picture frames I had forgotten to hang in the penthouse I legally owned. The space was oddly peaceful. No one called my name when I walked through the living room. No financial discussions echoing down the hall. No rapid footsteps from Eric pacing between calls. Just me. The soft wind outside the balcony. And the quiet peace that wrapped around me like a wool scarf after a long winter. While tidying up a drawer, the doorbell rang. The concierge delivered a brown envelope. No return address, no postmark. Just a simple line in blue ink. To Madison Blake. I sat on the window bench, gently opened the flap with my finger. Inside was a letter. Thin paper, slightly aged, and handwriting I couldn't mistake. It was from Eric's grandmother, Eleanor Donovan. A woman I once respected deeply. And also the first person to turn her back on me the day Eric and I got married. Dear Madison, I don't know if you'll even want to read what an old woman like me has to say. But I hope you'll make it to the end, just this once. I was wrong. You're a strong woman. From the first time we met, your eyes met mine without fear, without flinching. But I didn't see that. I only heard what Judith whispered behind your back. That you were after Eric's money, that your family wasn't suitable, that you were a regret the Donovans had to accept. I paused, sniffled softly. One corner of the page blurred slightly. I wiped it carefully and kept reading. At your wedding, I asked your mother why no one from your family came. She lowered her head and said, maybe they're ashamed of their background. But Madison, today I finally learned the truth. Judith paid the event planning company to remove your family from the guest list. She claimed it was to downsize, then made a separate payment to the coordinator. The invitations were never sent. My throat went dry. I clutched the letter, and in my memory, I could hear my mother's quiet voice on the phone. Maybe they just didn't want our side there. Maybe it was a printing mistake. At the time I believed it. I convinced myself it was just a mistake, that a wedding wasn't the place to dig up pain. But now the truth appeared like a blade frozen in ice, cold, sharp, and striking exactly where I thought I had gone numb long ago. Madison, I don't have much time left. I have nothing left to protect in terms of pride. I'm writing this letter because I've stayed silent far too long. And because I want you to know, the woman sitting behind the VIP row that day, the one who pressed her lips together as you walked down the aisle, was actually holding back tears, seeing you walk in alone. I set the letter down in my lap without reading further. Leaned my head against the back of the chair and closed my eyes. The emotion came without warning. It wasn't anger. It wasn't regret. It was a dull ache, one that hadn't shown its face in years. I began to cry. Not because of what Judith had done, but because I once believed it was my fault. I used to think that if I had just tried a little harder, softened a little more, made myself smaller, maybe then they would have accepted me. Now I understood. The problem had never been me. I cried like I was rinsing away a decade of holding it all in. Tears landed on the back of my hand, trailing along the curve of my wedding ring, a ring that no longer carried any promise. I placed it on the table. Not dramatically. Not regretfully. Just letting go. There was still the last part of the letter. You may not need forgiveness from an old woman like me. But I need to apologize. And if possible, I hope one day you'll live your life without seeing the past as something you owe. I've been watching Blake Hospitality from afar. And I am proud of you. Sincerely, Eleanor Donovan. I folded the letter carefully, like closing a piece of memory. Not to hide, but to keep. I allowed myself to hurt. Not to be weak, but to truly bring closure. A new life was beginning. And finally, I was walking into it with hands no longer clinging to anything that ever wounded me. That afternoon, Seattle was overcast as usual, clouds heavy at the horizon. But I still opened the balcony door to let the wind blow through. I was at my desk sorting investment folders when the doorbell rang. Not the concierge chime, not a delivery. It was the internal bell, which meant the person outside had been granted access to my floor. I walked over and opened the door. Judith Donovan stood there. A light gray fur-trimmed coat clung to her frame, her face bare of makeup. She looked smaller, not physically but in presence. The commanding energy that used to intimidate everyone in the Donovan family had retreated behind dark circles and restless eyes. I stepped aside. "Come in." She entered without a word. Her heels clicked softly on the hardwood, like her heartbeat pounding in her chest. I gestured to the chair across the table. "Would you like something to drink?" "Water." "No," Judith replied quietly, though her tone still carried a hint of pride. "I won't stay long." I sat down, crossed my legs, maintaining the same calm I'd used so many times at family dinners where I wasn't invited to speak. "So what brings you here?" I asked, though I already knew. She pressed her lips together, eyes scanning the room as if searching for something to hold on to. "Madison," she said, voice gravelly, "this is getting out of hand." I tilted my head. "You mean the press is finally telling the truth?" Judith swallowed hard. "What you've told the media, the video clips, the legal files, it's doing serious damage to the Donovan name. The family is being dragged through past political donations, shady investment ties, and the wedding incident. The media got a hold of the event staff list. One of them has spoken." I stayed silent. "We're going to lose everything if you don't stop," she continued. "Donovan Capital is under internal investigation. Shareholders are pulling out. Even Eric is starting to withdraw." I looked at her. In that moment, I didn't see the Judith I used to fear. I saw a woman who had lived her life through power, and now didn't know how to breathe without it. "So what is it you want from me?" Judith sighed, her fingers tightening around the chair arm. "I want you to make a public statement. Say it was all a misunderstanding. That Donovan Capital was Eric's creation. That you stepped back for personal reasons. It would preserve the family's image." I raised my eyebrows. "You want me to abandon all my work just so you can save face?" Judith tensed. But she kept going, her voice softer now. "I'll do whatever you ask. Just help me restore the Donovan name." I stood up, walked to the file cabinet and pulled out a folder. I placed it in front of her. "I ask only one thing." She looked up, expectant. "You'll appear at the press conference with me, before the entire press and all shareholders. And there you'll publicly apologize. Not with a prepared statement. Not with a vague remark. But in your own honest words." Judith froze. You want me to stand before hundreds of people and say I was wrong?" "No. I want you to speak the truth. That I founded Blake Hospitality. That I was the one who invested in Donovan Capital. That I'm not the social climber you claimed I was." She gripped the strap of her purse, face paling. "You said I didn't belong to the Donovan family. But the truth is, I'm the reason the Donovan name still holds value today." Judith stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. For the first time during our conversation, she didn't hide her emotions behind her gaze. "You know how much I hate losing." "It's not losing," I said gently. "It's taking responsibility." Silence stretched between us. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the room. Then Judith turned. Her voice was low, hoarse. "If I do this, will you remain silent afterward?" "I won't say another word. The Donovan name will retain whatever dignity is left. But if you refuse, I'll release evidence of the unlawful contributions in the Tacoma housing project." He stared at me, torn. Then after a few seconds she nodded. "I'll do it." I nodded slightly. "The press conference is Monday morning. The media team will send you briefing notes. But the apology, you'll write that yourself." Judith moved toward the door, then paused. She glanced back, voice quiet but clear. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for the Donovan name." I didn't react. I spoke just one sentence. "And that is exactly why you lost to me." The 42nd floor conference hall at the Grand Seattle Hotel was packed. Journalists, shareholders, big and small, financial institutions, past and current investors, and many former partners of Donovan Capital were all present. Cameras, lenses, and microphones pointed toward the main stage, where a long table draped in white linen waited for two women who had never shared anything, except cold silence. I sat on the left side of the stage, hair pinned up, wearing a simple black dress that hugged my upright posture. Not to look powerful, but to remind myself that I deserved to be there. Not as the woman behind a man, but as the one who built an empire from nothing. Judith stepped on stage a few minutes after I did. She wore a charcoal gray suit, no jewelry. Her steps were steady, not shaky. But her gaze no longer cast downward over the room like it had for years. Today she lifted her head, but without arrogance. The moderator gave a brief overview of the purpose of the press conference. My story had gone viral across national news. Everyone waited, though no one knew exactly what would happen next. I was invited to speak first. I stood, walked to the podium. The room fell into complete silence. "Good morning," I began, my voice calm. "My name is Madison Blake. Many of you may have only recently heard my name, but the work I've done, what I've built, has existed in the hospitality and investment industries for nearly a decade." I paused, letting my eyes meet faces throughout the hall. I used to be the woman behind the scenes. The one who quietly provided the funding, wrote the strategy, took the risks, signed the guarantees, but never appeared on the credit lists. I once thought that was enough. But I was wrong. Because when silence is used to cover injustice, it's no longer humility, it's complicity. I nodded toward Judith. "Today I'm not here to assign blame. I'm here to give the truth its rightful place." I stepped back. Judith rose. The sound of camera shutters echoed rapidly as she approached the microphone. She began, faltering, then took a deep breath. "I am Judith Donovan. And I would like to offer a public apology to Madison Blake." I didn't look at her then. I looked at the people seated below, the ones who used to call her a symbol of power and elite respectability. "For years I abused my position," Judith continued, her voice trembling but clear. "I treated Madison with prejudice, arrogance, and fear that she would surpass everything I ever was. And today I admit, without her, Donovan Capital would not exist. I owe her. This company owes her. And the reputation my family once held was built by her, not me." The room fell still. A few murmurs rippled through the shareholder rows. But I didn't care what they thought. I returned to the podium. Judith's eyes no longer met mine. She looked down, no longer trying to stay above. "An apology can't change the past," I said, "but it can be the start of something new." I pulled a folder from my pocket and placed it on the table in front of me. "And because I believe true power isn't in keeping things for yourself, but in using it to lift others, today I declare, I will transfer 40% of the shares in the Blake Hospitality chain, valued at $96 million, into a newly established foundation." I turned toward the screen behind me. A logo appeared. The Eleanor Foundation, supporting women who have been abused, erased, and marginalized in marriage and careers. This foundation will be governed by an independent board. Its goal is to provide financial support, legal aid, and rebuilding assistance for women who've been pushed out of systems they once held up silently. Applause began to break out. Scattered at first, then all at once. The entire hall stood. I didn't cry. I simply nodded. Judith didn't stand. She remained seated, hands trembling on the arms of her chair. No one reached to help her. The Donovan name at that moment was no longer a source of pride. It was the weight pressing down on her shoulders. Eric wasn't there. Reports said he had resigned from all positions, declined all interviews, and disappeared from the business world. Social media accounts deactivated. Internal emails disabled. And in later meetings, no one mentioned the name Eric Donovan as a founder again. Because everyone now understood he never was the one behind it. The person who truly wrote this story was me. On an early morning in the first week of the month, I sat by the large glass window in my penthouse, a cup of herbal tea in hand. Steam fogged the pane lightly in front of me. Below, Seattle buzzed as always. The sound of car horns, people calling out on the sidewalks, and the scent of strong coffee drifting up from the old cafe on the corner where I once worked as a waitress 10 years ago. I looked toward the weathered wooden sign, faded by sun and rain, where I used to stand behind the counter, wiping glasses, washing dishes, and carefully folding tip money into a tin box hidden beneath the bed in my rented room. Back then, I didn't know what success looked like. I just knew that coming home at night without being looked down on, without being pushed away from a dinner table, was already a dream. The phone rang. A new email. The sender was a name I didn't recognize. Emily K., Denver, Colorado. I opened it and read slowly line by line. Dear Madison, I know you may never read this, but I wanted to send it anyway. I'm a wife. I used to be a daughter-in-law in a family where I was always seated at the end of the table during holidays. Where decisions were made without asking me, where I was called the burden with opinions, the temporary outsider. I've followed your journey. I've read every article, watched every clip. And for the first time in my life, I saw someone stand up for all of us like me. I signed my divorce papers this morning. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I realized I was no longer respected. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the courage to step away from a life of quiet surrender that I once thought was normal. I set my tea down on the table and typed my reply. I didn't think too much. I just wrote exactly what my heart said. Emily, starting over is not a loss. It's the greatest gift a woman can give herself. I hit send. It wasn't the first letter I'd received like that since the press conference. But every time it made me pause, take a deep breath, and remember why I did it. Not for revenge, but to reclaim justice for a voice that had been silenced for far too long. I stood, threw on a cardigan, and stepped out onto the balcony. The morning breeze brushed my cheek like a whisper of freedom. Down on the street, a couple strolled hand in hand, the woman resting a palm on her pregnant belly. They didn't look up, but I smiled at their every step. In the distance, the new Eleanor Foundation building was taking shape. The name sign was still covered in cloth, but I knew that in a few weeks, it would become a place where women could walk in for legal counsel, financial guidance, or simply a moment to breathe without being judged. The doorbell rang softly. It was Erica, my assistant. She brought a few folders from the new office and a stack of handwritten letters sent in from around the country. I took them, thanked her, and placed them on the table. Would you like me to go over next week's schedule? She asked. I shook my head. Later. Today, I want to spend the morning on things that aren't on the calendar. She nodded, smiled, and quietly stepped out. I sat alone again, opened the stack of letters, and picked one at random. The handwriting was simple, the paper a little wrinkled, but the words written with honesty made my chest warm. I used to think I'd die in that house where no one called me by name, just his wife. But you made me believe. I have a name, I have a voice, and I have the right to live a life I choose. I folded it up, gently pressing my palm over the paper. Took a deep breath. There was no feeling of triumph. Just a feeling of belonging. Finally, after all the nameless dinners, the strange glances, the little jabs like needles, I had finally taken my seat at the table, both literally and figuratively. Not because someone invited me, but because I deserved to be there. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? Sat at a table where everyone talked to each other but no one looked you in the eye? Been called vague labels instead of by your true worth? I've been through all of that. But I also stood up. And now I want to hear from you. What do you think about this story? Have you ever kept quiet for the sake of family only to realize that the one thing you needed most was respect from yourself? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll read them. And I believe many others will too. People who need to know they're not alone. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to follow the channel so we can continue exploring powerful journeys of family, courage, and life-changing choices. Because somewhere out there, maybe right now, someone is waiting for a reason to begin again. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be the one who gives it to them.